I'm not interested in money. And I decided to use business as a method to bring change, as a catalyst. We pioneered wind energy in Britain. We built Britain's first solar park, Britain's first electric car, the world's first national network of charging points for electric cars, and a whole bunch of other stuff after that. And for me, that's where the value is, to have lived a life making that kind of change. It's not about size.
Pioneer, visionary, self-made man. No, I'm not talking about Tony Stark. I'm talking about somebody very real. He exists, and it all started on the side of a hill in Stroud in the west of England after he was basically a travelling hippie for a decade. Today, he's worth in excess, allegedly, of £100 million. He started the world's first green energy company, apparently designed and built the first electric car, and owns a football club. Oh, and by the way, he also owns a business which makes diamonds from literal thin air. Now he's going into politics. He's been a major donor for the Labour Party, one of the most high-profile backers of Keir Starmer ahead of the last general election, and his name is increasingly in circulation when it comes to any kind of debate about the green economy and how Britain reaches net zero. Today's guest is Dale Vince. This is going to be a phenomenal conversation. We talked to lots of interesting people on this show, but his biography is like few others I've ever met. This is going to be such a thrilling ride, I can assure you. Dale Vince, welcome to Downstream.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's been a long time in the making. I remember asking you a couple of years ago, and you said, I just really don't like going to London.
Ah, that's interesting. It would have been true back then, less true today.
You're finding a place for London in your heart now, are you?
In my life.
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, I don't know if it goes as far as to be in my heart. I mean, I quite like London, but I still quite like leaving it more than I do like getting here. But I'm finding like more purpose to be here, and kind of outcome, really. I mean, because I always knew that's where a lot of things happen and a lot of people like to be, and I'd just be like, oh, you're so London centric. Do you know what I mean? And actually, it was a good filter for me as well. If people said, oh, we really must meet, when are you coming to London? I'd say, well, when are you coming to Stroud? It's a good filter, actually. It's like a bar, and the people that weren't really that bothered wouldn't come.
They're missing out because Stroud is fantastic.
Stroud is wonderful. That's true.
You're very much a person of the west of England, right? That's been your stomping ground for a really long time.
For a while now, yeah. Yeah, maybe 30 years.
What's so special about the west of England?
Well, I didn't really choose it, I would say, Stroud. It was circumstantial. I was a traveller in the early 90s, and I was parked on a hill with a little windmill on my trailer, and that's how the whole kind of recent history part began for me. And so I just got started in Stroud, the idea of dropping back in to build a big windmill. I'd spent 10 years living on the road, and I just stayed in Stroud. It's a great place, actually, but I got there kind of accidentally.
Yeah, I think anybody who's kind of exhausted of the UK, if they've lived in London too long or a major city, go to the west of England. You've got Stroud, Bristol, Hay, Brecon over the border. Gorgeous. Some of this stuff you're talking about, your early life, which we're gonna start with, which by the way is fascinating. I'm not buttering you up. Is in this book.
You'd
Manifesto.
have to use margarine anyway, butter wouldn't work.
Sorry, there you go. Yeah, exactly. A vegan alternative. Manifesto, the battle for a green Britain, and you talk about your early years at the start, and I have to say it's a unique story. There are many boring people in British public life. You're not one of them. So you said you were a traveller. For people who aren't acquainted with that term, New Age travellers, what were they, and when are we talking about?
We were people that back in the 80s, which is when it began for me, early 80s, we were kind of like... we felt dispossessed, I think, cut out from society. It was Thatcher's Britain. My own personal experience was I'd got out of school as fast as I could. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and kind of mingled about looking for that, and realized that unless I had a job, I couldn't live in towns. I just couldn't do it. The world doesn't work that way. And I'd been to a few festivals as a teenager, saw people that appeared to be like living in vehicles and stuff, and I thought that looked amazing. And at some point, very early 80s, I decided to give it a go. I spent 50 quid on an old vehicle and jumped in it and hit the road. No phones or sat navs or internet or anything like that. I just thought I'd go out and find other people that are living on the road. It's quite an adventure, really.
So what inspired you to do that? That's quite an unusual thing for somebody who's 16 to embark on such a drastic course of action. Were you always like that? Was there some life event that prodded you into that?
I think I was as a kid, and at school I was kind of different, challenging the rules. For me, I couldn't understand why we had to wear uniforms at school, or even why I had to go to school. Actually, the day I left school was the happiest day of my life, because I felt like I'd got out of prison, because that's kind of all I'd ever known was school, and I just wanted to get my time back to find what it was I wanted to do in the world. So I've always, I guess, been a little bit different, and let's say I had that experience. It wasn't quite 16, it was probably closer to 18 of kind of like, bumming around, hung out with a biker group. I was a biker then. And it was just hard to make things work if you didn't have a job. And I didn't want a job. I didn't want to be forced to have a job and a career and start, getting a mortgage. And, blimey, I think my parents used to say, well, what are you going to do when you get old? And I'd be like, fucking hell, that's a very long time away. Do you know what I mean? I don't want to live my life preparing for the time when I can't work anymore. Do you know what I mean? All of that seemed wrong to me when actually there was so much to be done and experienced. Because a lot of people, it struck me, don't really start to live until they retire. And actually it kills a lot of people, retiring. This is what I thought as a kid. It didn't make sense to me to work all your life so you can retire. I mean, I never understood that. And anyway, it seemed to me that the world around me, society, if you like to call it that, was a difficult place to be, kind of rejecting me, if you like. There was a clash. And I thought, but there must be like another way, really, and I'd seen these people, as I said, that appeared to live in vehicles and go to festivals and stuff like that. And, I just left town is what I did. I just quit it all, figuring that I could live in a different and better way, kind of independent as well. It was about just finding my own way in the world and my own place. And I knew it wasn't where I was.
Were there any sort of cultural things that inspired you to do that? Was there a film? Was there a book? Was there a song? When you were growing up, who were the people you say, I want to be like that? That person's cool.
No, nobody.
It was all inside you.
Yeah, perhaps. I went to Reading Festival, I think, when I was probably about 16. Took acid, had quite a vivid time of it. It kind of changed my outlook on life a little bit. I had a job at the time. I decided I better quit it, and for silly reasons, really. It's a kind of silly story. It's a bird's eye in R&D, and it was kind of a fairly interesting job. And I was still very young, and I had a haircut one day, and the boss said to me, 2 more like that, and that'll be about right. It was at that kind of environment. I'd ride in on my bike, take my bike jacket off, and put a suit jacket on, that kind of stuff. It was, I was trying to, I guess, in a way, fit into a place I didn't belong. Anyway, I left Reading Festival and thought, look, if I stay in this groove of life, I'll never know what it's like to have long hair. It's super trivial, but actually super important. So I quit the job.
Speaking to Dale, Vince, really impresses upon you the importance of building stuff, doing stuff, creating organizations that are bigger than any one single person, any one single moment. That is what Novara Media is. We've been going for over a decade, trying to build a new media for a different politics. If you think our mission is important, I certainly do. Why not support us? Get on board. Go to novaramedia.com/support and help us build that new media for a different politics. As Dale's journey, his story tells you, change can take a while. You get there eventually. We'll get there too, together. Go to novaramedia.com/support. And what about your parents, quickly? Were they an influence? Were you rebelling against them? Not really talked about in the book.
I didn't really talk about them. I think we clashed a lot.
What kind of people were they?
My mother was, I think they were both fans of Thatcher.
Okay.
That kind of
So very
Should tell you a lot.
rigid, believe in order, etc.
Yeah, they thought I was a communist, actually. They used to tell me that, and I used to think, well, what are you talking about? Just for like having, views, kind of pro people, pro worker type views. Do you know what I mean?
And they were like, where the hell has this come from with our boy?
Probably.
So let's talk about...
But actually, when I was 30, I'm just going to jump in here, they told me something really interesting, that my grandmother was a gypsy, and I didn't know that. And I wondered if it explained the kind of wanderlust that I had, a wanderlust, because I was really happy on the road. And as a kid, I remembered I went to a scout camp once for about a weekend or a week or something. I don't know what it was. But when I got back to the house, I was just depressed as hell to be inside a building. So when I was about 30, they'd kept it from me all my life. I don't know why. But they hated gypsies. Whenever they moved in down the road, they'd be very anti-gypsy. And they told me that. And I thought, okay, that makes a bit of sense.
See, the more people I talk to about this kind of stuff, the more I buy that line of thinking about the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. But it doesn't have to be one's immediate parents. Almost always there is something, you go back a generation or two, of a similarity. New Age travelers. So you mentioned a little bit about who they are, the lifestyle and so on. What's the importance about the 1st of June 1985 for both that movement and you personally?
Are we talking about the Battle of the Beanfield?
That's right. That's right.
Oh, okay. Well, let's see. I kind of hit the road in the early 80s, and it was about festivals, free festivals. They were a thing at the time. People would just go and camp in a field and throw up some tents, and somebody might have a sound system. Wouldn't be a big thing or anything like that. The free festival scene and the traveling scene were kind of precursors of the rave scene that came along much later. But it was about freedom. There was all kinds of people there living in different things, came from different places. It was a kind of radical environment. There were, it really suited me. There was a lot of concern about the environment, animal rights. I bumped into all kinds of interesting stuff about food. I was already vegetarian by then. I'm trying to think, was a vegan quite? I'm not sure. It would have been on the cusp of that time, but it was like a hotbed of ideas and that kind of stuff. And I was in Wales, running up to this important date in Wales, living in some woods, working on an organic farm, picking vegetables in the winter. That was a really kind of great experience. And then we discovered that some people had occupied the Molesworth US Air Force Base, where they were going to put cruise missiles. And so went and joined that. This is important kind of background. Well, I think it's important anyway. But we went and occupied this base with them for the winter, and then we all got evicted. It was the Guardian reported that it took more army personnel than it took to take Goose Green in the Falklands, and there was like about 100 of us, just peaceful hippie types, and we were surrounded in the middle of the night by the army. And Michael Heseltine, Defense Secretary, flew in a helicopter with a flak jacket on and makeup made for TV and went straight in front of the camera. It was a really surreal experience. But they pushed us all out onto the road and created this convoy, and then had no idea what to do with it. And the cops bounced us from one county to another through that spring. It was like the gift to the neighbors. They would just escort us to the boundary and say, you're somebody else's problem now. And we go take another airfield, disused airfield. They were favorite spots. But eventually we found a way towards the Stones for the annual Stonehenge festival, around the solstice in June. But this year, Thatcher had decided that the traveller way of life was a threat to national security. This came out later in some papers released 25 years later, I think it was, The Guardian published. But she decided we're a threat to national security. There were injunctions preventing persons unknown from approaching Stonehenge. Ultimately, an army of riot police that had just come from trashing the miners during the big miners' strike. And they did the same thing to us, the convoy, as we were known.
And they stopped you reaching Stonehenge?
Yeah, they did, yeah.
And the number of people arrested is incredible, right? It was the highest number of arrests since the Second World War, is that correct?
Something like that, yep. Probably still is, I don't know.
500 plus people arrested. What was the impact of that day on you in terms of how the police behaved and so on? Because some of the language you use is pretty, not graphic, but you're pretty clear that it was a semi-transformational moment for you.
Yeah, it was it was kind of brutal, really, and kind of for the previous couple of years, we were used to being picked on by the police. You know, there was overt prejudice. We were outlaws, people with no rights, and that kind of stuff. We were used to that, but on this day, it was a premeditated attack of the utmost brutality, smashing everything and everybody. There's even a pregnant woman truncheoned over the head, quite famously. There are pictures in the newspapers and stuff like that. And it was just wanton destruction. And I think to see that the state were capable of that was it was an eye opener, actually. In fact, literally, because the next night I started a habit of sleeping with one eye open without knowing it, and my friends were like, "That's a bit freaky." Like we had no vehicles because they'd all been smashed up, so sleeping outside around a campfire, and it must have been traumatizing because I had one eye open while I was asleep.
I mean, that sounds like PTSD or something, frankly.
Yeah, and I think I probably did have it, because in recent years, it's 40th anniversary, I think. Oh, it is, yeah, this year, and I was talking about it recently, and it got a little bit choked up, just to recall events, and that happened, another 5-10 years ago, when again, people asked me to talk about it, and I hadn't realized quite how impactful and shocking it was. I did leave the country as a result of that,
Wow.
along with a lot of other people, just to really get away from this great hostility.
Yeah. I mean, I've not had anything like that, but I've been in a squat before where we were evicted via the roof. And I remember...
Via the roof?
As in, they came in via an adjacent building. The bailiffs came in via an adjacent building. They went over the roof, and then they broke in through the attic, and they went down the building that way. And to this day, if I hear like thuds above me,
yeah,
or footsteps, I have this weird, oh my God, they're coming.
Yeah.
And I have memories of being, 4 a.m. because I was on the top floor with my underpants just looking up and seeing dust coming down on my face. Like,
oh, wow.
Not quite the Battle of the Beanfield, though. You describe a really corrupt and brutal, not just police response, but also criminal justice response. You also claim in the book that you were, as a group, drugged.
Yeah, we were. There's no doubt about it. And those among us who'd been to prison, they said they knew what it was. Largactil, they said it was routinely used in prisons to just suppress people. We all just fell asleep.
So it was a sedative.
Yeah, sedative. Yeah.
And is that still used, or I presume not? I mean,
I don't know.
That's a really major claim. What I find interesting and obviously highly unusual, Dale, is that you've gone through all of this, and today you're a multi-millionaire, at least in terms of your assets. You're always happy to say you don't have liquid assets, and in terms of...
I'm glad you said that.
Well, it's useful, always useful, isn't it? In terms of your assets, in terms of, obviously Ecotricity, the football club, various other business interests. Did you always think when you're involved in the New Age Traveller movement, or even before as a kid, did you always think, I'm going to do something substantial?
Nah, I didn't.
So what drove you then to start Ecotricity? And it was just a process of do one thing, then another, and before you know it, you're worth allegedly on paper £100 million, or?
Well, look, I kind of remember the moment quite clearly. I was on the hill outside Stroud. Had a trailer, a little windmill on the roof. I'd been living in the later years of my decade on the road with a windmill power in my life, and so I was aware of wind energy, how it worked. I knew where I was parked, if it was windy or not, because I could see the effect on my batteries, through the meter and that kind of stuff. I was in touch with that stuff. I became aware of the climate crisis, and that the way we made electricity in our country was the biggest single cause of it, burning fossil fuels. And I thought I could live another 10 years like this, traveling, living a low-impact lifestyle myself, or I could drop back in and try and build a windmill on the hill I was living on, where I knew it was windy. And I thought, I'll do that.
And this is after you came back from Spain?
Yeah. Yep. I was in Spain about a year or something like that.
And what was the impact of living in Spain? Obviously, that's probably a moment of reflection, looking back on...
It was a great adventure.
Yeah.
A really great adventure. Left England with about 50 quid or something like that, and an old fire engine that I'd put a new engine in over the winter on a farm in Wales. Swapped the petrol engine for a diesel engine I had a socket set and and a bottle jack as a toolkit. And it was an incredible transformation. 4-wheel drive fire engine. I turned it into a tow truck. I had a crew cab that I lived in. I lived in for about 5 years, actually. And we just hit the road. And it was a road trip across France and through Andorra, across along the south coast of Spain, until we got to about La Linea, around Gibraltar, and bumped into some traveling types, other people that had, found their way to Spain at some point.
Are you still in contact with people from that part of your life?
Not from Spain, but from the traveling decade. Yeah, a couple.
And how have their lives panned out? Are there some other people who've done, are they mega interesting sort of trajectories as well?
I can't. How can I answer that? No, they're just boring.
Boring, two up, two down, family.
No, actually, no. At least one of my friends is still living on the road, but in a kind of like a permanent location, on a farm. Honestly, I don't know. I haven't given it a lot of thought, but they're still around. And then I bump into people all the time that say, "Hey, I was on the road around about the same time." And and there's some people that actually founded the Green Party that were around during Molesworth. And I bumped into a guy I hadn't seen for 40 years at a Green Gathering a couple of years ago. It was really interesting. He said he was one of the founders of the Green Party, and it was never meant to be a political party. He said it was meant to be, infiltrate the main parties, to be Green Conservatives and Green Labour and Green Lib Dems, and it turned into a political party. It was really interesting.
We'll talk more about the Green Party in a minute. I find it really interesting with these movements because often, even if they fail, they have these really long-lasting, impressive afterlives. Obviously, you get it with 68, you get it with workers' uprisings in many places, you get it with the miners' strike, and you get it with the traveller movement and other ones besides as well, of course, in the 80s and the early 90s. And we're still living in the afterlives of those, somebody who is taking those values into the business world or other people who are trying to take those values into politics. Mm-hmm. Was it a failure as a movement or was it a success?
That's a job to know, isn't it? I mean, I never really thought about it. I've only ever thought that in my own terms, I succeeded because my own definition of success was to do what the fuck I wanted to do, to put it bluntly, and not measure my success by status or money or something like that. I lived on very little money, £2,000 or £3,000 a year probably. I became a kind of scrap man. I built trucks and things, and I cut them up, and I weighed things in, and I had just a great old life, So in my own terms, living on the road was a great success. And I got to the end of 10 years and thought, well, I'll do something else now. I never really thought about it as a movement and whether it succeeded. I'm not sure that it had an aim as a movement. It was a really disparate group of people, and the cops would always come to a site and say, we want to talk to your leader. And we'd all go, well, who's that? Because we didn't have a leader. And the cops couldn't believe that a group of people like we were didn't have a leader. But, it was very unconventional. It was anarchy.
But you're talking, I know you're saying it wasn't a movement, but you're talking about post-material.
I'm not saying it wasn't a movement.
No, I know, but like in a formal movement, leadership hierarchy, etc. But you've got post-material values, you've got consideration about climate change, animal welfare, veganism, etc. These are all things which have become incredibly mainstream within our culture. There's to and fro, obviously. But maybe that's just a different impulse. You don't take a stand back and think, oh, you know what, actually, this is a far more mainstream thing than it was 30 years ago. And that's because of the stuff we were doing at Molehill or Beanfield.
Molesworth, yeah.
Sorry.
But that's all right. But look, I mean, it's a valid way to look at it. If I think about it now, which you're making me do, we embraced renewable energy before it was remotely a thing, and now it's mainstream. Same with plant-based living, that kind of stuff, animal rights. They're all more than remotely things now. They're big issues that have gone mainstream. So you could say that the traveller movement was ahead of its time, and perhaps we acted to a degree as a catalyst to make these things happen. I don't know.
I think so. I like to think so. Do you think the police has substantially changed since your brush with them in the mid-1980s?
I think they have. I think there are still bad coppers. I hope they're the exception, not the norm. But I think one thing that has changed is technology. Everybody today has a recording device for sound and for video. And I think that really curtails the amount of badness that we get from the police.
Do you think that's the game changer?
I do, yeah, absolutely. Because, back in the day, anything went, and it was your word against theirs. There was no other evidence. But now, even passers-by have got, video devices. That big issue seller that the cops killed, a cop, what he truncheoned him over the back of the head or something.
Ian Tomlinson, right?
Yeah, and he fell and died. That wouldn't have come to light without passerby evidence. Without the fact that mobile phones are in the world and everyone's got one. So that kind of stuff has brought a level of scrutiny to the cops that they weren't subject to in the 80s.
So some people who would hear your account of the Battle of the Beanfield will say, I've experienced something similar with the police, in the climate justice movement, etc. And therefore, that's a reason why we should abolish the police. Is Dale Vince a police abolitionist? Doesn't sound like it.
No, I don't think so. And I've met some decent coppers as well, so I'm not. I'm quite relaxed about it. And I've been on a couple of climate protests and stuff like that. I haven't seen great violence. I don't know if there's been violence on the scale of the Beanfield, done to climate protesters. I'm not sure there has.
Let's talk about business. Oh, sorry, go on. You want to?
Well, I was just going to say, in terms of prison sentences, if you perceive that as an act of violence, then I think great violence has been done to the Just Up Oil people that got 4 years and stuff like that for being on a Zoom call to talk about protesting. I mean, that's just incredible.
So you think the violence has moved from a truncheon around the back of the head to the CPS?
Judicial violence.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And do you think that's obviously getting worse? It's gotten worse over recent years. Do you think it's going to continue to get worse? Do you think that's the trajectory of the criminal justice system right now? Or do you think we've maybe hit a peak?
I think we've hit a peak. I can't see Labour making it worse. I'm hoping they'll make it better in time.
We'll talk about Labour in a minute. Ecotricity.
You keep promising to talk about things. Green, Labour.
Well, there's a lot to talk about, Dale. You're very, well, we will talk about the Greens and the Labour Party around the same time, because
they're connected.
There's a big conversation there. Why did you choose one over the other? That's what the Greens will say to me.
Oh, yeah. They say it to me as well.
I bet. Let's talk business. So you founded Ecotricity. When did it become Ecotricity? This energy sort of provider that it is today?
I started it. I formed a company in 1995. So that's 30 years ago this year. And we were actually the first green energy company in the world. You couldn't buy green electricity anywhere. Nobody sold it. Nobody heard of it. And I didn't know that at the time. And it, again, was kind of circumstantial. I was on the cusp of building my first windmill on this hill outside Strata. It took 5 years of battles with planners, grid companies, the National Trust, all kinds of people, went to the High Court, all kinds of crazy stuff. I did it all myself and learned the whole process completely. I had, in effect, a blueprint to build more windmills, and I thought, well, I should do that. But to do that, I needed a fair price for the power. Went to see the local electricity company, for want of a better way to describe them, post-liberalization and privatization. They were still monopoly buyers, and I went to them to say, do you want to buy some green energy? Because they're the only people I could sell it to. And they laughed at the idea, literally laughed at the idea, and said, here's a rubbish price, And I left the meeting thinking, well, in that case, I have to become an electricity supplier. I have to cut out the middleman to reach the end user to get a fair price to build more windmills. So April 1995, I formed what is now Ecotricity. We were called the Renewable Energy Company back then. It was a kind of joke because there were 12 energy companies post-privatization, and they were known as regional electricity companies. They had the same acronym, REC. And so I started one called the Renewable Energy Company, and we were REC. And on the energy system, you have a moniker to identify yourself in energy trading. And we chose to be REC 13, 13 being, my favorite number. So, it was just a bit of fun. But I think it was around about the end of the 90s. I was looking for a better name. The Renewable Energy Company is a bit of a mouthful. And I think I had the idea in a bath, actually. I was thinking about it, and I was thinking, green is a bit overused. Remember, this is the late 90s. I was thinking green's a bit overdone. Need a better name. Came up with Ecotricity. Everybody said it was rubbish, but we did it. And hey ho, here we are.
So you were the first renewable energy company in the world, you just said.
Yes.
You knew the industry inside out. You had top to bottom.
Not at that point. Not 1995. I spent a year studying it, and then in 1996 we supplied our first electricity onto the grid.
When I say industry, I mean as in the hardware. You literally built the turbine
the
yourself.
Wind energy, absolutely. Yeah.
There's very few people on the planet that would have been in that situation. I'm sure there's a few, but not many. Today, fast forward to 2025, Ecotricity has 168,000 customers. Octopus and British Gas have 12, 13 million accounts in terms of how many people they serve. Do you ever think, we had first mover advantage. I had the big idea before others realized it was even plausible. I had the technical understanding. We should be 10 times bigger than we are.
Nope, never.
Why?
Well, I didn't do it for business reasons, actually, conventional business reasons, which is to make money, be big, that kind of stuff. I did it because I thought it needed doing. I thought this new kind of energy should be in the world. I saw it as a route to building more windmills and stuff like that. It turns out we've done a lot more than that in the course of our history, more than just wind. We can talk about that later. There you go. That's my return ping. I'm not interested in money. And I decided to use business as a method to bring change in the energy industry to begin with. Our mission widened to include transport and food. But morals and ethics matter to us, and business has good attributes and bad ones. And I chose to leave behind the bad ones, keep the good ones, and create a different kind of company. Actually, we're not for dividend. So we don't pay dividends to shareholders. All of the money we make stays in the company, goes into our mission. And the outcome is much more important to me, or it's a different kind of outcome. It's not about size. As a catalyst, we pioneered wind energy in Britain in several instances. We did, big things first and different things first. We built Britain's first solar park, Britain's first electric car, the world's first national network of charging points for electric cars, and a whole bunch of other stuff after that. And for me, that's where the value is, to have lived a life making that kind of change. It's not about size.
So a skeptic, and I buy all of that, a skeptic would come along and they would say, you could achieve so much more if you do achieve the scale, maybe even through having dividends or whatever. And you can enact that change more quickly because, of course, in a capitalist society, money is social power, it's resources. You can influence political outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. What would you say to that?
I would say it's a lovely theory. Now show me an example of an energy company that's done more than we have.
So you think if you'd gone down that route, you would have failed on your own terms and...
Well, I think the world around us disproves that theory. There's not an energy company that you could name that's done more than we have.
But if you look at something like, and this might sound daft to start with, if you look at a company like SpaceX, and I'm mentioning that because it's a private company, right? It's not a public limited company. There's a very weird mission behind it, which is send human beings to Mars. Yes, of course, it's dependent on public contracts with NASA and various US agencies.
Huge subsidies.
Of course. But it has this weird mission, but it's achieving it through market mechanisms. And clearly, besides anything else, Elon Musk is, a megalomaniac. And I wonder if, Dale Vince had a touch more Elon Musk megalomania, there's an argument maybe as a country we'd be further down the road of renewable energy, but you just don't buy that clearly.
Well, I think, I alone can't do everything that you might imagine we might already have done, or the more that we could have done. But I think that the role we've played in this, in pioneering renewable energy, green energy from the get-go, and then turning it into a business argument to make the business case for green energy and for electric cars. We started the electrification of transport. There wasn't an electric car in Britain when we decided to build one, or the world. This is pre-Tesla. And I think, all of those are probably at the limit of what a person or a private company could do without political intervention or support, without the changing the rules of our economy, which has started to happen now. It started to happen a few years ago, I think, ahead of the election, with Labour turning to green policies and stuff like that. Really exciting time, great opportunity, because it came at the right time in history when green stuff suddenly was an economic argument, not a moral one. So the other thing I would say is that having shareholders that want money from a company are a kind of inhibiting factor. So I make all of the decisions, ultimately, in the end, myself. I make decisions about what we do based on what I think is the right thing to do, the best thing to do. It's not always a business case behind what we do. Sometimes it turns into one after the event. I couldn't do that if I was answerable to shareholders. And so, we've grown from, one guy on a hill in a trailer to where we are today with 800 people and, I don't know, 600 million turnover, something like that, with no external investment, and an entire series of innovations and firsts that that broke the mold of things that had gone before us. I think that is unmatchable, actually.
That's kind of unique, right?
That's that word.
I'm trying to think of, there are other people out there, particularly in the US, who've started massive companies with no external investment, but that's because they've left another company with
a load of money,
$10-20 million or whatever, whereas you were a new age traveler.
Yep.
Yeah, that is kind of unique. On the electric car point, that was called and I've written it down, the Nemesis. So when did you build that?
Started in 2008, and it was a kind of combination of things. We'd advanced our mission from just energy as the kind of single biggest source of carbon emissions in our country. Early 2000s, I went looking for the second and third biggest because I figured, right, they must exist in the world. And it was transport and food. Energy, transport and food became then our mission because 80% of all our personal carbon footprints come from those three walks of life: how we power our homes, how we travel, what we eat. And so 2008, I was a bit of a petrol head and a tree hugger. I wrote about this on my blog at the time. I wanted a better car. I wanted a car that still had performance, but it didn't burn things. Looked around for electric car, none in the world. Decided to make one, which is a crazy idea. But we got some motors just out of R&D, some batteries just out of R&D from Korea. The real difficult part was stitching them together with the control systems, because we couldn't buy that. We had to build that. And anyway, built the Nemesis. The rationale for the Nemesis was, if we're going to build an electric car, we have to build a supercar, because the kind of stereotype of the day would be that electric car was like a milk float, if you even know what they are. Milk used to be delivered by a little electric thingy kind of stuff, or a noddy car or something like that. And what I wanted, and what I found in all of my time in this realm, is that if you're going to introduce an alternative to something, it has to be at least as good as the conventional one. So, in football, our organic pitch is regularly award-winning. It's not an organic pitch, but, the car, it had to be a fantastic car so that people didn't go, yeah, but, it still holds the land speed record in Britain right now, 15 years later, something like that.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, so how fast was it top speed?
I think it was 150 something. So there are categories for land speed records, and in its category, it still holds a land speed record. It's in the Science Museum now. I gave it to them a few years ago.
Why the Science Museum and not Bewley?
I have no idea. I just wanted to move it on. It had sat around for a long time, and we got in touch with them and said, hey, do you want this? Because it was Britain's first electric car. And, kind of the world moved on incredibly quickly. Within 10 years, electric cars were all manufacturers were talking about. We went from none to like it being completely the future. And having that car led me to understand that there was no infrastructure to charge them, and that without that, we had this chicken and egg problem, that people wouldn't buy cars with nowhere to charge. No one was going to build a charging network because there were no cars on the road. So we just jumped in and built the electric highway on motorway stations up and down the country. And the rest is history.
And that's a business you sold?
Yeah.
When did you sell that?
Oh, I want to say 2022. I'm guessing now, but I think so.
How much you sell it for?
I'm not supposed to tell you, but it's so long ago now, I don't think anybody will cry. 70 million quid.
Right.
Up until then, it only lost money. For 5 years, we gave the energy away. We didn't even charge people, and it was a part of the buzz at the time. People were buying Nissan Leafs, the only car you could buy, and they were buying them because they could charge for free, and it was like a big deal. Because when we stopped, I know this because people told me, they're like, "Oh shit, that's the reason I bought an electric car." And stuff like that. 5 years we did it for nothing. We were losing about £1 million a year for 10 years, and then these guys came along and wanted to buy it. And actually, our tech by then, our tech was really old. We had the oldest charging stuff on the road, and there were lots of competing networks by then. It needed a load of money investing in it. The technology had gone from 3 kilowatt chargers in 2011 when we started. And before we sold it, we installed a 350 kilowatt charging system in Rugby, I think it was. I mean, that's a big shift in technology. We basically had 3-pin plugs on the motorway to start with, and moving all the way to 350 kilowatts. It was a fantastic experience, actually, and rapid pace of development.
So 350 kilowatt, how quickly would that charge your regular family saloon EV?
Oh, blimey. It depends on the size of your battery and all that kind of stuff. But, you're probably talking half an hour or something, like 20 minutes, half an hour. But the trick with an electric car, one of them is not to go for 100%, because the last 10 or 20% of charge takes the longest.
Right.
So, it's more of a splash and dash mentality.
And the battery lasts longer, right, if you do it like that? Or
Fast charging is meant to degrade battery life, but, I don't think most people hang on to cars long enough to experience a battery problem. I don't think so. But it's theory in terms of like the number of cycles you can get from a battery, and the harder you charge them, the less cycles you should get out of the lifetime of is.
And what car do you have now?
It's a pink Lotus.
It's a
pink Lotus.
A pink Lotus, sorry.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds very nice.
Yeah, it is very cool.
I was expecting you to say Tesla, and then, we'd go there.
Yeah, right.
Did you ever have a Tesla?
No, God, no.
Because, of course, you had a famous Barney with Tesla.
Yeah, I did, yeah. But, even before, there might have been a world in which I'd bought a Tesla, but, yeah. I think they're quite naff. But
why are they naff?
Just to look at, and I guess you can't escape the background. So for me, like, it was the experience of dishonesty with Tesla, the company driven by the founder, in terms of trying to steal the electric highway from us, while pretending to negotiate with us about some kind of partnership. It was an incredible experience. So I can't separate myself from that. And you can't also separate out the recent events, the Nazi salutes and all the other kind of, bollocks that's been going on and coming out of Musk's mouth, and the things he does, I think he's a bad man running a bad company, and I wouldn't buy his car.
So just for people who are listening, they know all the Nazi salute stuff and watching. They won't be familiar with this legal battle that you had with Tesla, protracted legal battle, David-versus-Goliath, over the charging stations.
It took about 3 years, I think, to conclude with a settlement and them paying us a load of money. But it began one Sunday evening when we received an email. When I say we, my colleague Simon, who ran the electric highway for me by then, we got this email from Tesla to Simon saying, this is what we're going to do starting tomorrow. We're going to encourage the landlords, our landlords, the motorway service operators, to break contract with us, the electric highway. We're going to start a campaign in the newspapers to undermine them as whatever it was they were going to accuse us of, I don't know. And we're working also to do the same with government. It was a three-pronged approach to basically destroy the electric highway so that they could have our locations for their new Tesla network that they wanted to build. And up until then, we probably spent 6 months talking to them. They approached us and said, we're coming to Britain. We'd like to kind of collaborate. And then I think I was going to say big mistake, but I'm not sure it was a mistake in the end, because we had an NDA with them, non-disclosure agreement. They said, show us all your stuff, like people do, and we'll sign an NDA to say we won't misuse it. So we shared with them details of our leases with our landlords and all that kind of stuff, and that's what they misused. But like I say, it wasn't really a mistake, because the fact that happened enabled us to get a High Court injunction. On the Monday morning, we went straight to the High Court and got an injunction for them to stop completely what they were doing, which mightily pissed them off. I think I described them and Musk as like cowboys in the press at that time. Like, it was like the Wild West. They came to us and offered us baubles, for what we had and what they wanted. And when we refused, they tried to take it by force. It was an incredible experience. But when the email landed, we thought it was a dark joke. We thought somebody's having a laugh, because these people we'd been talking to for 6 months, all nice as pie to our faces, couldn't be capable of that. It must just be a joke, but it turned out to be real. And the relevance of the name Simon is that they had a new PR guy called Simon, and they simply sent the email to the wrong Simon.
And that's how you knew.
That's how we found out what they were actually up to.
So they were looking at some kind of a takeover, which mutually beneficial. You'd make some cash.
Not a takeover, just collaboration.
Collaboration. And then they decided, we'll do a hit job on you, defame you, etc.
And it was getting closer and closer to the launch of their car in Britain, and we kept saying to ourselves, why haven't we, closed the deal? Why are we still talking about this? We were just a couple of weeks away, which seemed strange since we'd started 6 months previous, and then of course we understood everything. Behind the scenes, they'd been persuading our landlords to break contract. They even offered to pay their legal costs and stuff like that.
Wow.
Just breaking contract. It was at least amoral.
Do you think that's how Elon Musk does business?
I do.
That's the default.
I think it's how he lives his life. Yeah,
He doesn't give a shit about other people. And
I think that's probably right.
well, that's all the evidence you got to go on. It's pretty conclusive, isn't it? Really.
Well, it's quite damning. It's quite damning. We in the legal process, there's a thing called disclosure, where each side actually has to share all internal comms, even when they're incriminating. We got to see a whole bunch of stuff. Elon Musk saying it's not their electric highway, it's our electric highway. We're like, where does that come from? What's that even about? But that's how he saw it.
Is that in the public domain, or if
no,
I want, can I buy these
emails?
No, these because you can access certain, probably not that one, right?
Probably
I presume.
not. I assume not. Yeah.
Also, I think there's like a sort of statute of limitations or whatever. You can't get court documents 7 years later. When was this?
That's a good question. I'm gonna guess around about 2015, something like that.
Too late.
Yeah.
Too late. You told my colleague Michael Walker last summer that you were campaigning for Labour, not the Greens. See, we got there in the end. Because you wanted Labour to have a big majority, so, quote, we can have the greenest government we've ever had. Since then, Labour have backed new runways at Heathrow, Gatwick and Luton. They've decided to not build HS2 past Birmingham. They've scrapped things like the £2 bus fare cap. Are you still optimistic about the Labour Party's green commitments?
Yeah, I am. And I think they're already the greenest government we ever had. I think the bar was low, I should say that. But, within, 72 hours of taking office, they unbanned onshore wind. And solar itself had come back since the Cameron ban because it was economic on its own feet and wasn't really banned in the planning system like wind was. They unblocked some massive solar projects within the first 6 months. There's all kinds of good stuff happened. The 100% green energy on the grid by 2030. I mean, I'm an ambitious, optimistic person. I think that'll be tough. I do. So I think it's a great target to have. So they've done a bunch of good stuff. The support for Gatwick and Heathrow expansions and stuff like that, at the moment, it's just words. There's a real question as to whether Heathrow ever gets a third runway, whether there's a case for it, whether it gets built. I'm not the only one that thinks that. Was it Michael O'Leary, boss of Ryanair? I think he might have said that as well. It's like, I think some of it might have just been a little bit of posturing, like as if to say, kind of like, we're odd. We can talk about concrete and conventional growth as well as we can talk about cuddly green stuff. Bit of a presentation to, let's say, the right-wing audience or something like that, particularly the media in our country, which of course is predominantly right-wing. So I took it with a bit of a pinch of salt. I mean, obviously I argued against it and pointed out its flaws and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not dismayed by it.
So you think that there's obviously Heathrow and Gatwick are the big ones, but there probably will be some.
Luton was in the list.
And they're reopening as well. I think another airport in the Greater Sheffield area.
Yeah. But look, you
don't think that'll all happen, basically.
I don't. But here's the thing. The thing about flying is we don't have to stop flying. We just have to fly differently. And this is the theme of all of our work. And, in burgers, cars, football, even in diamonds, we found other ways to do these things. And 2 years ago, we launched an electric airline. Now, we aren't flying yet, but the technology, the engines are being tested for CAA approval right now. And it's a viable model to have electric planes, I think initially with a range of 500 miles, 72-seaters, so like a national carrier. But the international range, the European range, is coming a couple of years later. And so what I'm saying is, in a way, it doesn't matter if they get new runways, because eventually, just like on the roads, airplanes will be electrified.
So I've obviously heard about the idea of domestic flights being electrified. That's on the horizon. You believe that it will be possible at some point to fly from, say, London to Athens on an electric plane?
Yeah, absolutely. Europe is going to be no problem. Transatlantic, bit more of a challenge. But before we know it, there'll be an answer for that. And this is the nature of life. We should never judge the future by what we can see is possible today, because before you know it, something comes along. Before there was an electric car, everybody thought electric cars can't work.
Well, some people still don't think they can work for some
That's
reason.
true.
I don't quite know why, but
That's true. But we've got electric buses now. HGVs are coming out of R&D. Electric trains is a really interesting option because the conventional way to electrify a train is with overhead lines or powered rails, and it's super expensive. But we have a possibility now to make them like a toy train set, a Hornby train set, stick batteries in a carriage behind the locomotive, and electrify rail that way. And when you look at the statistics, rail is the most efficient way to carry weight. Of all the vehicles we might try to electrify, the easiest one to do is a train. The hardest one is a motorbike, followed by a car, followed by a truck, followed by a train. And the stats are really compelling in that respect. So on a gallon of fuel, a car will carry a ton 50 miles. On the same gallon, a truck will carry the same ton 150 miles. And on the same gallon and the same ton, a train will do 500 miles. And people say, "Oh, a train would be too heavy, too many batteries, blah blah blah." They're absolutely made for it.
do you have an electric bike?
I do,
You do.
I do. But I just want to say, just to finish the train thing, we
Please.
could electrify all of our rail network just by changing the trains, just by adding a battery carriage. No overhead lines, no live rails, no problem when going into tunnels with overhead lines and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, we could just do that. But yeah, I do have an electric bike. KTM Scrambler is my main one. I also have a Harley Davidson electric, which I got a couple of years ago. And I'm building a Ducati electric. My favorite bikes are Ducatis, and they still don't make one. So I decided to make one.
Sorry, I want to go back to the trains thing now because somebody would say that we need to. It's outrageous that Britain doesn't have more electrified rail network. China as a percentage, it's just exploded. We're very much behind actually most European countries when it comes to electrification. You're saying we don't need to spend a ton of money electrifying.
Change the trains. Just change the trains.
And are there counter arguments to that? I can hear sort of the rail people in my ear saying, "No, it's nonsense." And
Yeah, I'm sure. I've heard that all my life. But there's no practical reason for not doing it. Like I said, trains are ideal for carrying tons and tons of batteries, which is what you would need. We can fast charge them at stations or just swap the carriage out. People used to talk about cars, about this idea of swappable batteries. Like that was the answer to the range anxiety problem. But of course, the problem is that, battery might weigh a ton or something like that. And the idea that you could just pull that out the bottom of a car and swap it for another one, it's fraught with all kinds of problems. But on a train, you just have a carriage, decouple the carriage, pick up another one, and on you go.
I'm persuaded. And also the great thing with trains is, the journey. It's a similar argument with electric buses and HGVs. The journey and the distance. And
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about Labour again. Were you surprised when they only got 33% of the popular vote?
Actually, what I saw was the 411 seats and the massive majority. That's what I saw. And then I think later on, that deeper analysis says actually less vote share or less votes than Corbyn got or something like that. I was very surprised by that, yes. It was a unique election, wasn't it? I think after 14 years of criminal misrule, really, by successive Tory prime ministers, but probably mostly Johnson in terms of criminal misrule. I think the country had had enough, and Labour, Keir Starmer in particular, found himself leader of the party at the perfect time. Actually, we had a properly electable person leading the Labour Party. I think Corbyn should have been electable, but the right-wing media were against him. But Keir Starmer was in that perfect place at the right time. We were all sick of the Tories, and Labour got a landslide, but with, as you say, 33%. So the distribution of votes is the key to that. And when you look at our electoral system, first past the post, that's got to be the reason, isn't it?
You'd like to change it?
Well, I think we should, because I don't think it's very functional, very effective. I think proportional representation would be ideal, because then we would literally get representation for our country, for the makeup of our country. The views of people in our country would be represented in proportional representation. Whereas in first past the post, they're not. I mean, Johnson got a huge majority, didn't he? For example, and I'm not sure what his vote share was, but it's going to be hovering around 50% or something like that of the country. And that's. I mean, how is democracy so revered when, with a, let's say, sub 50% share of the vote, you can have a huge majority and just do whatever you like? How's that reverable?
I also think that so many things like NHS underfunding. You know, you go from famine to feast. You get the Tories for 10 years, they underfund it. You get Labour, they try and fix it. Yeah. And I just think, you know, if you have coalitions, even people like Reform have to be serious. Reform can't just say ditch net zero or do this or do that. You actually have to be serious and sensible and have a longer horizon in regards to policy making. On Farage, are you worried that Starmer's going to be a one-term prime minister?
I wouldn't say I'm worried. I'm not a person that does worry. I think it serves no purpose to worry, to get all philosophical on you, because if something's going to happen, it's going to happen anyway. And if it doesn't happen, you've worried for nothing, is how I see it. So if I'm concerned about something, I'll do what I can to prevent it from happening, but don't kind of worry that it's going to happen. I would like him to be more than a one-term prime minister, absolutely. And I think he has every chance. But I do think that to do that, Labour have to get energy bills down. I think it was one of the big promises that people cling on to. Energy bills is one of the things that Farage is kicking them about. Why are energy bills so high? Oh, it's because we've got more green energy on the grid than we ever had before. He conflates the two things and says we can't afford net zero. It's a toxic message. It's quite dangerous, and that bothers me. Because our energy bills are so high because we allow this link from the gas price to the price of all electricity. We first surfaced this during the energy crisis in 2022. It was a mad link. The price of gas globally went up tenfold at certain times during the crisis. The price of North Sea gas, our gas, also went up tenfold because we allowed that to follow the global price. But we allowed that also to drag up the price of the wind and the sun and all other forms of electricity in our country, which enriched a few people greatly and impoverished millions of people equally greatly, I would say, in their own terms. And it's a bizarre market mechanism that serves no purpose other than to reward speculators and traders and producers.
So a counter-argument is that because of intermittency issues, the most reliable part of the grid when it comes to electricity generation is gas. And that's why you index it on that.
It's not about indexing. I'll tell you what happens. It's an auction. And every half an hour of the day, the national grid asks for a certain amount of power. Let's call it 100 megawatts. And it gets bids from generators, and it builds a stack, a merit order stack on price until it gets to 100 megawatts. It starts with the cheapest, ends with the highest. The highest is always gas, and then it pays everybody below gas the gas price. Now, how does that make sense?
Well, gas, presumably, because it's the most reliable.
It's got nothing to do with reliability, because these generators are still wind or sun driven. They don't become more reliable because you pay them the gas price.
But I'm saying in terms of gas, you're always going to have, or maybe you disagree, it's good to talk about this, you're always going to have a certain component of the overall energy mix is going to have to be either a fossil fuel or nuclear, or at some point hydrogen, right? But you're always going to have something to deal with the intermittency problem.
But this mechanism is not about intermittency.
Right.
It's simply a bizarre way to pay generators. You know, instead of receiving what they bid, what they ask for, they get what gas asks for.
So why doesn't Labour change it?
I don't know. I keep banging on about this issue to them. Early doors, the feedback was from DESNZ actually, was civil service said it was too difficult.
That's most things, isn't it?
I think you're right. So we looked at it. I have an energy trading team, of course, and we say, well, it isn't actually. It's a simple set of rules within the trading system. We're 2 weeks away now from publishing what we think of as the Haynes Manual of how to break the link. We're going to show the government exactly how to do it, show the civil service just what it will take to do. Our view is that it might take 18 months to allow for the unwinding of forward purchases of power. So that's just a commercial issue, not a technical issue. Changing the rules is very simple, but it would be done over a period of time to allow for the commercial adjustment.
That seems sensible.
Yeah,
you're doing God's work there, Dale. It seems like a political slam dunk, and I don't understand why it's not happened. So I presume it's technical, but obviously not.
No, it's not technical. And you know, we've produced a report. I think it came out last week. It's about breaking the link, and we look back at the peak of the energy crisis, and the cost of having a link was about £78 billion. And we look forward to 2030. On the future price of gas, and the cost of not breaking the link will be £40 billion. And I think last year it was £5 billion. So it's international fossil fuel prices are relatively stable at the moment, but you can see where they've been and you can see where they're going. And it doesn't make sense to keep this mechanism that drains so much money from our economy. We don't get a single pound invested in infrastructure. We don't create a single job. The money just leaves our economy.
Yeah. And right now, maybe today is not a good example because it's nice and sunny, but generally speaking, what percentage of the overall electricity mix?
I think we're approaching 50 from green sources, but I think that includes nuclear probably.
Yeah.
And I think it includes tree burning from Drax.
Yeah.
Which we kind of need to stop.
Which is not renewable, right?
No. It's
biomass, technically.
Biomass. They call it biomass. I call it tree burning. They bring these trees from Canada, from kind of pristine forests, and claim that they magically land on our shores carbon neutral because they leave the carbon footprint in Canada.
That seems kind of daft.
Yeah, kind of daft.
You oppose nuclear power. Why?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, so it's not quite that simple, but it's not complicated. I'm not against what we've got. I think it makes sense to use what we've got. We've actually spent tens of billions on Hinkley, and I think it's still 5 years away, maybe 10 from being finished. I'm not opposed to finishing it because there's so much been put into it. I am opposed to Sizewell C. That's not started. And if you look at new nuclear, they take about 10 years to plan. They take 10 years to build if it goes on time, and it never does. And then they take another 10 years to pay back their carbon footprint. So you're looking at 30 years to break even on a carbon basis. And so the question is, how on earth can that help us with the urgency that we face to take carbon out of our economy? How can nuclear help us? It's also the most expensive electricity that we've ever known, bar none. And it leaves behind a toxic legacy that is deadly for longer than all of human recorded history, for which we only have the technology to contain for 100 years. We're talking 8,000 years worth of toxicity, and we can contain it for 100 years. And if the Romans had had nuclear power, think about this, Bath would not be a fun place to go as a tourist.
But you said, and I know you think that, you're optimistic about the future capacity of humans to innovate. Presumably, you think that within 50 years that we'll be able to overcome the 100-year limit on containing nuclear waste products.
Do I think that?
That's a future innovation that
maybe
we can leave to...
Maybe we can, or maybe we'll just put another 100 years worth of concrete on top of what's already there, I don't know. But I don't think it's... Given everything else, the fact that it takes 30 years to break even on a carbon basis, that it's the most expensive electricity ever dreamt of. It's eye-watering expensive, and that doesn't include the disposal cost, which currently runs at about 120 billion pounds for the stuff we've already built. It's a mad sum of money. It's almost the NHS budget for 1 year. Given all of that and the toxic waste, why? What kind of legacy is it to leave to future generations? There's some deadly toxic stuff here. We don't know how to contain it beyond a couple of generations, but you can deal with it.
Well, I guess the counter argument is that nuclear doesn't have issues of intermittency, and it is guaranteed to be a zero carbon or ultra low carbon form of...
After 30 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's not many things you can say that for, right? If we're saying, look, the most important thing right now is to reduce emissions of carbon dioxide and other gases into the environment, that's the number one thing, then I think you kind of have to have some nuclear in terms of baseload.
Well, we've got some now.
Yeah.
But I think we should see it out. I think that intermittency is like range anxiety in electric cars.
Okay, I've not heard that before.
It's just over considered. Actually, the smart grid is an innovation in terms of shaping not just provision, generation, but also demand. We can actually take load from industrial users and domestic users at different times of the day to manage the grid. The grid has these incredible peaks and troughs of demand if you go over a 24-hour cycle, because we all want power at the same time. With the smart grid, with smart meters at the heart of that, with battery storage, and load management on both domestic and industrial, we can reduce the peaks and the troughs. We can bring the grid at the moment has a load factor of 50%, so it's being used on average over the year at half its capability because it has to deal with that and that. If we bring it closer together, we can get more power through the grid without upgrading the grid, and at the same time deal with intermittency. There's a whole bunch of stuff coming to help us do that. And I'm confident that by the time we've transitioned fossil fuels down to nearly nothing and our nukes have exceeded the end of their life, that we'll be there. And don't forget, Hinkley is going to last for a while. Once they get it running, it's going to run for 25, 30 years or something like that. So I think we've got all of the elements, actually, to make this work.
Kevin Badenoch described the UK's net zero 2050 target as impossible without, quote, a serious drop in our living standards. Why is she wrong?
Well, she didn't offer any evidence, actually. That was just an empty statement, some political rhetoric. She didn't say why. She didn't say how. She didn't say where the money's going. So it's hard to argue against, except to say it's just wrong. It's against what the Climate Change Committee say. It's against fact. And it's also against the other fact that not dealing with the climate crisis is going to cost us vastly more. I think a recent report just a few weeks ago said we'll lose 30% of our economy if the world hits 3 degrees temperature rise. So it's also the case that it's cheaper to deal with than prevention being cheaper than actually not even the cure, because we can't cure it at 3 degrees. It's just runaway problem. So it's just posturing. Farage has gone down that road. Trump has come along and gone down that road. Badenoch, she's a leader looking for a direction of travel, and she's chosen like Sunak did, actually. And I think it was a big mistake tactically to turn his back on green energy ahead of the election. He created a clear divide between Labour and the Tories, which I think just made it easier for everybody to decide that they'd had their time.
Yeah, the costs of this not working out are pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, they are.
If you look at there was a great write-up actually in the FT Weekend a few months ago. Britain should be much colder given where we are on the planet, and these are climatic phenomena which can change quite quickly, and we don't really understand basically anything. That there's increasingly quite a body of evidence suggesting that there's a decent probability that we get very cold very quickly in this country. And I wonder what Kemi Badenoch will be doing if the country gets to minus 15C.
But it's also a fact that green energy is cheaper than fossil fuels. It's the cheapest form of energy available to us. It's abundant. We have enough to power the country 20 times over, and it's a forever fuel. It will never run out. Not like our North Sea did, not like nuclear power stations will. They use uranium. We don't make uranium in our country, by the way. We reached peak uranium a few years ago. The world uses more uranium now than it mines, and we're eating into stockpiles. And by 2050, there's forecast to be a global shortage of uranium. So where's the energy security in a new fleet of nuclear reactors in a country that doesn't have uranium?
So why do you think people like Farage and Badenoch are so skeptical about the green economy? Because these are all things that are positive. I think the average reform voter loves the sound of those arguments. Why are they so hostile to people like you?
Well, I don't know if they are hostile to me.
Not personally, but the cause you represent.
Yeah, I think it's just politics. I think it's convenient. For both of them, it's a potential route to power. It's a convenient argument for Farage. I mean, Farage has got form, isn't he, with Brexit, of riling people up against a villain of his own creation, blaming everything on Europe, immigration, living standards, the discontent of people in our country. He gave it a focal point, an outlet, and it became the EU. And, we ended up leaving, largely as a result of his work over 20 years, I would say. And I think he's a one-trick pony attempting a sequel, and his sequel is Nexit, Britain's exit from net zero. And it's as simple as that. If you look at his tactics, it's disinformation, misinformation, demonizing net zero and woke policies and green energy, and claiming, for example, to claim that green energy is the reason our bills are high is simply counterfactual, because it isn't. It's the cost of fossil fuels that's driving our energy bills up. And when we get to a place where we don't even have to be 100%, let's say 90% powered by green energy, and we've broken the link to fossil fuel markets, we'll be making and pricing our energy in our country, which we've never done before. And we'll be saving tens of billions of pounds from leaving our economy every year. Because at the moment, pre-crisis, we spent £50 billion a year just to bring fossil fuels here to burn them. And then, the money goes up in smoke. When we make our energy from renewable energy, we've already got twice as many jobs in green energy as we do in fossil fuel energy in our country right now. This is massive economic opportunity, and the chance to be so resilient as a country that it's incredibly counterfactual for Badenoch and Farage to be saying these things, and they offer no evidence to back that up either. So it's like Brexit revisited, Salastia.
I just, because their whole thing is make money, right? That's the whole point of the centre right, is make cash, business, and there's a lot of money to be made in these industries that you're talking about, and they're not interested in that. And there's a part of me that wonders, just because caring for the environment, green energy is left coded, they think, well, therefore I have to hate it, I have to disagree. I think it's the same with. I think it's the same with Gaza, by the way. I think lots of them just, oh well, Palestine's associated with the left, therefore I support Israel. It's like, well, you don't have to.
It's possible.
You don't have to think like that.
It's possible. I do wonder if I kind of explore it in my book just a little bit, whether there's a bit of a kind of psychological lefty-righty split. On the left we like trees, we like nature, we like climate, avoiding stuff, and on the right it's nuclear power. It's big infrastructure projects and stuff like that. Kind of macho stuff. It's interesting.
But you like big infrastructure projects?
Well, I do. Which kind?
You're building a big football stadium for your football team, Forest Green.
That's not big infrastructure. That's not what I mean.
5,000-seater stadium.
12. But actually what I mean is like a nuclear power station, a 40 billion pound project, HS2, 120 billion pounds, that kind of stuff, big stuff. If we're not building fracking and that kind of stuff, then we're not doing what the right thinks we should be doing. I think you're probably right about the lefty-righty stuff. And it's a shame because it does get in the way. But I think also that business gets it, right? The opportunity of green energy, business got that, right? It's a global business now. It's the fastest growing kind of form of energy in the world, bar none, has been for many years. And all kinds of massive international companies have staked an awful lot of money on green energy. But it's like Brexit, isn't it? All of the experts said, no, it won't be like that. It'll cost us. We can't get these deals. We can't have our cake and eat it, and experts became rubbished, right? They were thrown out the window, though you would say that kind of stuff. A very successful campaign of misinformation. And we're in a place now where, businesses aren't anti-net zero. The CBI are putting out some fantastic reports these days about the green economy. Grew 10% last year, 10 times the rate of the normal economy. They put out another report which was stunning to me. They said if we allow the decline of nature to continue as it is, within a decade, we'll lose 12% of our GDP. That's 3 Brexits. And I'm like, what's the CBI got to do with nature? But it's about the economy. And so I think businesses get it. You talked about the centre right wanting to make money. The green economy is the place to make money, but maybe not for politicians. What they see is to be opposed to this net zero wokery is a route to power, and that's all they care about. In the same way that Johnson chose Brexit as a route to power.
I think that's probably right. There was a bit of a scoop there. You said that this new stadium you're building, Eco Stadium, is it called?
We call it Eco Park.
Eco Park, sorry. I swear, Dale, all the information I've seen online says it's going to be 5,000 capacity. And you're saying it's 12,000?
Yeah, up to. So, it's going to be 5,000 to begin with, right, but we'll be able to grow it. It's in the design.
It looks like a great project.
Yeah, I think it'll be amazing. And wood is this most amazing material. You'll know this probably, but to be around. But a stadium completely made of wood, barely any concrete at all. It'd be the lowest carbon footprint stadium in the world ever since the Romans invented concrete. Because 75% of the carbon footprint of all sports stadia in their entire life is not about energy consumption. It's about the materials they're made with on day one. It's baked in, embedded.
Wow, that's a great stat.
Yeah.
That's a great statistic.
Yeah, it is. And it's concrete and steel that do that, by the way. Concrete and steel.
Let's stick with Forest Green. Tremendously successful. You went from non-league. I'm now getting old. I'm 41. We used to call it the Vauxhall Conference. I don't even know what it's called anymore. That's the league you're in now.
I think it's called the Vanarama. Is it the Vanarama this year? I'm not sure. It depends on the sponsor, doesn't it?
Yeah. I still call the League Cup the Coca-Cola Cup. My dad calls it the Milk Cup. Or the Carling Cup. So you went from what was the Vauxhall Conference, the elite level of amateur or semi-professional football in this country. You were then in League Two, then in League One, and then you suffered 2 relegations.
Yes, we did.
Gary Neville, one of the owners of Salford City, said you were a really well-run club when you got promoted from League Two to League One. What went wrong for Forest Green?
Well, it's really simple, actually. Our manager left. Watford came in for him. But he didn't tell me he was having those conversations, which, I kind of wish he had. He should have done. He was involved in the recruitment of our new players for League One at the time. Our director of football left in the same circumstances, involved in recruitment. Didn't tell me he was in negotiations with, I think it was Portsmouth.
Who is this?
The director of football. Yeah, Richard Hughes.
Oh, what? He was your director of football?
Yeah, not the famous one from the Premier
No,
League. No.
Okay, I was going to say he's gone to Liverpool now.
Yeah, that's it, not the Liverpool one. And then we lost our three best players, midfielder and two wingers. So we were basically like asset stripped by clubs that saw our success. We won League Two with a tiny budget, like £1.5 million or something like that. It's quite incredible. It was a great season. We won on goal difference on the last game of the season, which was really apt, because on the first season that I rescued Forest Green Rovers, we stayed in that league, whatever it was called, on goal difference on the last game of the season. So I thought it was quite symmetrical.
But that's quite common for a team to overachieve, get promoted, and then you get asset stripped. But then you also get relegated from League Two.
Yeah.
So what happens? You just lose all momentum? What?
I think a series of bad recruitments, actually. One compounding the other.
Managers, directors, etc.
Exactly. Managers, directors of football, players actually driven by bad recruitments in directors of football and managers, and the whole thing. It was just a downward spiral, which we have arrested now. We're in the playoffs to get back into League Two.
You're third, right?
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So what was the lesson you learned from that sort of period of 2 years of failure?
Well, I don't think there's a single lesson, but I can see where the mistakes were made, and it was in recruitment. It was, and then sometimes it's possible to try too hard, actually. And ironically, for the first 10 years, I think, of running Forest Green Rovers, I think we had four managers. We had the best record probably almost of any club. We were we were a club that didn't just swap managers out kind of willy-nilly or at speed and that kind of stuff. And we were having two or three a year in a ultimately desperate attempt to find the right combination.
And one of those was Duncan Ferguson.
Yeah.
What was he like?
He's a great man.
Big Dunk.
Big Dunk. He's lovely.
But didn't work out football-wise.
No, it didn't. If you look at his results, it just didn't work out. And we called time on it. But we're still friends. So that's nice. And we had Troy Deeney as well.
Yeah.
That didn't work out either. I mean, I think he got 4 games, but he got a touchline.
4 games?
But he did get a touchline ban for threatening the referee. He threatened to punch his head in or something, and I was just like, fuck, I can't live with that. And at the same time, he was calling out our players as babies and stuff like this. And I'm just like, oh, this is a bad... I didn't actually choose him. This was down to a director of football recruitment problem who said, I can get Troy Deeney in, like, as a player. And we're like, well, why wouldn't you do that? He was, I think, in the championship with Birmingham at the time. He said, but I got to promise him, like, he'll get a shot at the manager job when it comes up. What I didn't know is he told me anyway that he'd written it into the contract. And when the manager job came up 6 months later, before any of us expected it,
oh God,
he weren't ready. Director of football said, well, we have to give it to him. Turned out we didn't. When we looked at the contract after the event, we didn't have had to have given it to him, but maybe, he would have... well, it wouldn't have mattered if he'd have walked if we hadn't given it to him. It would have been better for us. But anyway, that was all a great learning experience,
And you had Robbie Savage's boy as well, right? Charlie Savage?
Yeah.
Nice guy?
Yeah, absolutely.
Did Robbie come along to watch him?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he's a good guy.
What one player would you like to sign for Forest Green? One plausible player, lower league player, you've seen them play. Let's say you get to League Two next year. Who, or maybe an ex-Premier League pro. Who are you thinking, I'd love that person to play for?
I couldn't tell you, actually. I haven't got a name. I'm not out there looking at players and thinking, oh yeah, we need him. It's not my job.
You're trying to decouple, the price of energy from gas. That's what you're trying to do. You're not thinking about a League Two journeyman.
That's right. And we've got some other plans as well. Like, we've got 3 reforms planned for the energy market. We've researched them all. We're going to publish in about 2 weeks' time the top line kind of summary of these 3 reforms that will halve our energy bills.
It's probably more important.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. That's how Labour could win the next election, and it's how we'll save tens of millions of economic waste and take so many people out of energy poverty. It's far more important.
Let's talk about Just Stop Oil. The juicy stuff now, Dan. Do you regret giving money to Just Stop Oil?
Nope.
How much did you give them?
I actually don't know. I think it was quite a lot.
You gave them, was one payment of $250,000, right? Or is that not true?
No, I'm sure it is. I think it was more than that in total. I want to say $500,000, but I don't know if it, because I match funded at some point. After the Daily Mail stuck me on the front page and kind of, said abusive things, I doubled down and match funded for Just Stop Oil. And I think some Hollywood producer joined in as well. And I think we raised £1 million between us in this episode, for which we thank the Daily Mail, just for fun. I don't know how much money I gave them, and I don't regret it in any event.
That's a lot of cans of baked beans.
It's a lot of just stopping oil, as it happened, because we did stop oil. We had to do it through the election in the end because Tory government weren't listening. In fact, they doubled down and went the opposite direction. But, oil has been stopped. And I think that's the most important thing.
But do you think, and I'm not here to criticise Just Stop Oil, I think it was very successful at raising the visibility of that issue. And I've only really thought this on reflection after the fact. It alienated a lot of people who otherwise would have been quite sympathetic. Blue collar, white van man, tradespeople, It alienated lots of those people who actually, when I think about it, 5-6 years ago, they didn't really care about net zero. And now they're like, they're militantly against it.
Maybe, I don't know. I hadn't made that connection. But look, I fielded questions like that for months. The peak of Just Stop Oil, I think, was the summer of 23. And there was a point at which I thought they became, I thought they'd gone from being super successful in terms of raising the issue to being super irritating, to have caused the Tories to go in the opposite direction and issue loads of new licenses because they found political capital in being anti-Just Stop Oil and that kind of stuff. And I thought it's now counterproductive. And so for me, it was time to stop funding them and instead seek to just stop the Tories through the election, because Labour promised that they would stop oil if they got elected. Now, that made a lot of sense to me. But there definitely was a crossing over point when Just Stop Oil became more annoying to more people than they were at the beginning. I mean, that happened.
I mean, and in your defence, that's one of the promises that Labour made that they've absolutely kept.
Yeah, as well as unbanning onshore wind and all kinds of other stuff, actually. Setting this target 100% by 2030 is an amazing target. It really is.
Was that a difficult conversation with Just Stop Oil? Was it like, It's Dale on the phone, sorry guys, the money, that's it?
We had a chat, and they're lovely people, and at first they couldn't understand why. They tried to persuade me that, I was wrong, and I shared with them, this analysis, ever such a simple logical analysis. We can't stop oil through protest, because all we can do is empower the Tories and give them a shot at winning the election by being eco-zealots, I think, is what Rishi Sunak called me at the peak of all of this, is in Washington, referring to me as an eco-zealot. I'm like, you must have better things to do. You've got
one of the country's buggered, mate.
That's right. And I shared with them, and eventually they got it. They said, yeah, okay, the only way to stop oil now actually was get behind Labour and get Labour to win. That's what I did.
So there are people right now who are in prison who were involved in Just Stop Oil. Do you ever advocate for their release or their efforts that you make privately to?
I have done. Yeah, absolutely. I attended the hearing at which they got those draconian sentences and, spoke to media outside amongst the crowd and amongst other people and stuff like that. And spoken out on social media. It seems clear to me that Labour won't do anything about that right now, but I'm hoping they will do something about that in the future, certainly in terms of changing the sentencing laws that were brought in by the Tories that caused these hideous sentences for taking part in a Zoom call,
But, I mean, Keir Starmer better than I do. I've never actually spoken to him personally. My wife has, strangely, but I've never spoken to him personally. But, I mean, Keir Starmer is trying to project a quite authoritarian political figure right now, partly because that's something that Tory, Labour swing voters really like. And it kind of seems contrary to that. I mean, he's taking the country in a different sort of direction, which is to say, actually, that precisely those kinds of crimes are going to be subject to greater punitive sanctions, not less. Would you disagree?
I don't think it's necessary. I mean, taking part in a Zoom call shouldn't get you 4 years in jail, should it?
Well, he was head of the CPS. Somebody went to prison for 6 months for taking a bottle of water, so...
Did they?
Yeah.
That's quite severe, but it's not as bad as 4 years.
That's true.
And one was theft and the other was a conversation.
That's true. You got me there. What do you think of Rachel Reeves as Chancellor?
Good.
She's good?
Yeah.
Sasha Lord, who maybe is the nighttime economy advisor for Andy Burnham in Greater Manchester, he was asked that question. He said she's bad. Why is she good?
I think that she's done well. I think her first budget was almost a conjuring trick. Raised £40 billion of additional tax, but left 90% of people not worse off. I thought that was quite amazing. I think she's walked a tricky tightrope between needing to spend more money on public services and not raise taxes too far, so that we don't squash growth. And a bad hand was inherited from the Conservatives, not just the 25 billion black hole, whatever it was that we heard a lot about, but also the public sector pay awards promises that were unfunded. They just hadn't been accounted for. I mean, the Tories were, kind of incompetent, at least. Probably, I think it was more than incompetence. I think they knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
They left a mess. And she's had to navigate that. I think she's done a good job.
I mean,
I think there should be a wealth tax, though.
well, I was going to say, so the budget, I actually do think the budget was good. I don't agree with the NI increase. I think that could come from somewhere else, but I agree the overall structure is good. But then since then, the numbers don't really add up. So we're getting now cuts to welfare, etc. Presumably you don't think that's good.
No, I don't. But I think the changes have been external, haven't they? The shortfall, there was 10 billion headroom that got wiped out by some movement in interest rates or something like that. And now another 10 or 15 billion recently from Donald Trump's trade war. So they've all been externally imposed on us.
But that's politics. I mean, that's not COVID, is it? That's not Brexit. That's the kind of margin of error, which is quite a common.
Well, I think 10 billion of headroom sounds like a lot to me. But I think I couldn't be Chancellor.
You couldn't?
No, I don't think I could, because I see things differently. But if you look at our level of debt to GDP, it's nearly 100%.
Yeah.
You look at Germany's is much lower, and so they've been able to relax the borrowing rules. I mean, I would borrow for infrastructure that pays its own way. My experience in business is, when you see a project that's got a rate of return, call it 10% or something like that, that's worth building. And you can borrow most of the money to do that, put in some equity, like when you do with a house, 20% equity, 8% debt. The project pays for itself. It pays its own debt, pays its own interest, and makes a return. That's the kind of thing we should be doing as a country, instead of gifting these opportunities to foreign investors.
So we should be borrowing to invest, which Labour is not doing as much as it could do. I mean, they have certain rules where they can borrow to invest, but you're saying that should be sort of leaned into more.
Well, I think I heard the other night that there's 100 billion of that's been made provision for borrowing to invest. I'm just saying that if I'm saying I couldn't be Chancellor. I'd be like borrowing to invest in everything I could see that was worth investing in, because that's how we build. For me, it would be how we build resilience in the country. That's what I've done at Ecotricity. That's what's turned us into a resilient company with no external investment. This is just a different way to do business.
My worry is, and I think that's John Maynard Keynes would agree with you, by the way. If we can afford to do something, we can do it. My worry is that lots of people in Labour have no experience of business. And this might sound like a very strange thing to hear from somebody who's a lefty, but they're all people that came out of law, NGOs, professional middle class, white collar jobs, which is fine. You have some of those people. I have many good friends who are professional managerial class. I'm a journalist. But at the same time, I feel like there's a real deficit in people in the Labour Party at the highest levels who've actually built or done anything, people like yourself. And I think that shows.
Do you think it's any different with the Tories?
I think the Tories are worse. But I think that I think across politics generally, we don't have enough people who've built stuff.
No, we don't. I agree with you. I mean, Boris Johnson was a journalist. Michael Gove was a journalist. I mean, I'm not sure what experience people like that. But David Cameron, what did he ever do?
PR.
Yeah,
he was at Carlton or Granada.
Yeah. So, I think it is a problem, actually, that politics seems to attract people that haven't got a lot of life experience, when I think actually it's what you need for the job. You need a broad experience of life, and bring that. That's something to bring to our democracy, where instead we've got career politicians who've never done anything except talk, actually, and maneuver, for the leadership role or to win an election or whatever it is. And the talk seems to take precedence over the doing.
Why don't you go into politics? Sounds like we need more people like you.
It's in my book. Why I didn't. I just didn't think it'd suit me in the end. I thought about it. I thought about standing in the last election. I thought about it very seriously and decided it wouldn't suit me. I'm glad I didn't now as well, because I've been able to continue to be myself, to be freely spoken, without fear of upsetting anybody that would matter, if you know what I mean. like, the whips or something like
I
that.
can't see you as an MP, but I totally can see you, or being happy as an MP, I can totally see you as Mayor of West of England.
Oh, really?
Totally. Like, Burnham, the Burnham role. Like it's like Letizia at Southampton, right? The free role. You just,
Yeah.
very few constraints.
See, I've got a free role now. I get to, I run this group of companies. I don't know if you know the breadth of what we do, but, we make diamonds from atmospheric carbon. We make school dinners. We run the Ministry of Eco Education, which is about eco-curricular for schools. We're in 20,000 primary schools with this activity. We're pioneering the extraction of food from grass and gas from grass. We've got some other inventions in the pipeline on the water and sewage front, and a new kind of generator. I get to do all of these things, and I don't think I could have a better life, actually. And I get to talk to politicians. I get to talk to the media, and I get to introduce ideas and policy suggestions and stuff like that. I run a thing called the Green Britain Foundation. We're producing policy papers. They're all about the green economy. Our entire aim is a green Britain. And we're doing rewilding projects, marine and land. I mean,
what kind of? Give me an example of rewild. I love rewilding.
Oh, me too. So we're bringing beavers into a site in West Sussex, along with red squirrels and pine martens. We've given a grant to some people that have started a hatchery for oysters up in the Shetlands to rewild the marine environment with oyster beds, which, like seagrass, create a great environment. We bought a ship for an outfit called the Captain Paul Watson Foundation recently, and we've just repurposed it for a ghost net team. And these are people that dive to retrieve old fishing nets and lobster pots and shit like that just kill wildlife. Fishermen dump it when they don't want it no more. And actually, there's a guy up in Scotland that's collecting all of these old nets, and he's just got himself a machine to turn this old nylon into pellets that are the raw material for making stuff like shirts. We're gonna make some for our football club, Forest Green. We're making goal nets out of fishing nets as a way of repurposing them and stuff like that. And I get to have all of these adventures actually, and push the boundaries of what can be done, and I love it.
Sounds a lot better than just sitting in Westminster having to do what the whip tells you.
It does.
You've definitely sold it to me. Did you fall out, and I don't want to talk about electoral politics anymore after this, did you fall out with the Green Party?
Nope. I mean, they may have fallen out with me for all I know. Last time I saw Carla Daniels, she was a little bit frosty. I was like, hey, Carla, but she wasn't so warm. But I think it's probably temporary. And I think, it won't be a consistent thing. I haven't upset the whole Green Party, I'm sure of it. I've got a lot of friends in the Green Party. Like I said, I know people that founded the Green Party. And my explanation to them was as rational, logical as it was to my friends at Just Stop Oil. Actually, the Greens can't win the election. And there's a real danger that Tories get back in, and that would be the worst outcome we could possibly have, because we had this incredible moment in history to elect Labour and change everything. And that was the most important thing.
I buy that argument in Bristol. I buy that in Brighton, even though, the Greens were the favourites from there, because those were Green Labour marginals. But you were in, was it Herefordshire? And you were backing Labour in Herefordshire?
I don't think I went there.
In Ali Chownes's seat. And I just thought, but that's a Green Tory marginal. Saying to vote Labour is give that to the Tories. And that's when I thought, has Dale Vince fallen out? Like, has he got?
Nah.
Has he got the Green Party in his sights? And I was like, what have they done to this man?
Yeah, not at all. Not at all. I got a lot of friends in the Green Party, like I say, and I've had conversations over the years. Like I think it was the previous election, local Green candidate came to see me, and we had a chat about stuff. And she complained to me. It's an interesting conversation. She said, Labour have taken our policies, and I said, you should be very happy, actually, because you can't get into power. And so the biggest change the Green Party can make is to influence the other parties, to make them adopt green policies. I do.
Because they could have 20 MPs in the next 10, 15 years, and that becomes a party that can be in coalition.
10 or 15 years, that takes us to what, 2040?
I think they could have 15 MPs at the next election. It's a hung parliament. I mean, I'm being very conservative.
Who knows? Who knows, right? I don't think we need a hung parliament. I think what we need is, strong, clear leadership on the green agenda, and I think Labour have got that. And everything else is a risk. We're against the clock here in terms of carbon emissions, completely against the clock. We haven't got time to take risks, and we've got an electoral system that is a little bit unpredictable, I would say, in terms of outcome. And green policies need to be adopted by the mainstream parties. The Tories have gone the other way. That leaves Labour, and that's our best hope.
What's your favourite book? I love asking this to people. I bet you're a big reader.
Well, actually, I don't read books. But I did read a book a month or so ago. It's quite a unique event for me. I went to Cornwall for a week, and I saw this book on a bookshelf of a motorway service station, and I was intrigued. I think it was called The Wager, and it's a retelling of an historical event, but in a kind of with a bit more of a narrative than just a flat historical event. This expedition, anyway, that went from Britain at the time of a war with Spain around the Cape of South America into the Pacific in pursuit of a Spanish galleon and stuff like that. But it was a fascinating tale, and in it, I learned something really, really interesting, because a lot of my work is about diet, about food choice. We haven't talked about it, but my next book is going to be called Cow in the Room, and it's about that. And people always say, well, we need to eat meat. We can't survive without meat. And I'm kind of familiar with the myths around that, whether it's B12 or vitamins or calcium, B12 or protein or calcium. I'm familiar with that, and it's not true. But what I learned from this book is that if you don't eat plants for like a month or something like that, you get scurvy. And scurvy is not some trivial disease. The historical accounts of this were the blackening of the lower limbs, complete lethargy, no energy at all, teeth falling out, and all kinds of skin lesions and stuff like that. A completely debilitating, deadly disease from not eating plants. And when these sailors were shipwrecked, they just started eating plants out of the forest. And suddenly their scurvy was lifted. And it was a time when nobody knew what caused scurvy. And they were just cured of scurvy by eating plants. So not only can we live without eating meat? The fact is we can't live without eating plants. It's vitamin C. All plants have it, and all you need to do is eat some plants and you're okay. It doesn't have to be lemons and limes and stuff like that.
It can be in some meat though, right? So like
vitamin C, no.
I think Inuit, for instance, they get vitamin C from like seal blood, but I think...
Okay, I didn't see that in Tesco's last time I was there.
Well, quite. No, but quite. But I'm just safeguarding people, and there'll be some carnivore people watching this, and like, how could you not know this? It's a very good retort.
I know it now.
Hey, I might be wrong, but Inuit don't eat much fruit and veg. And I'm with you on this because I've had IBS recently. So I'm on one of these elimination low FODMAP diets, which means you have to eat just rice, chicken, very low fiber. It's not nice. It's not nice. It's not fun. So veganism, let's talk about this for 1 minute because it's very interesting. You think we should be eating zero meat. Yeah. Not meat reducing, zero meat.
But I'm happy with reducing as a way to the end goal. It's not an all or nothing overnight thing. Nothing is. We're in a fossil fuel transition. We need to be in an animal farming transition as well.
Because I think the zeitgeist was during COVID, there was lots of interest in veganism and meat reducing, and I think now it's the sort of dial's going the other way a little bit. I think people are interested in high quality meat, organic meat. Organ meat because of the alleged. You recoiled there. Organ meat. Well, no. So, for instance, if a woman has a miscarriage, for instance, she loses a lot of blood. Doctors will say you need to have a massive influx of iron, right? And of course, you can have an iron transfusion at the hospital, and you take iron tablets. But they'll say you need to eat high sources of iron, which actually is things like organ meat and meat. Or is that wrong? As the NHS,
It's one of the myths of us needing to eat animals, actually, that we need it for iron. It's actually the wrong kind of iron. It's called heme iron, and it bioaccumulates in our body, and it's toxic, whereas iron from plants does not. And actually, plants are a great source of iron. The same is true of B12. Actually, it's a different story with B12. The argument goes that you can only get B12 from animals, but guess what? 90% of animals farmed in our country are kept indoors, and B12 is what they normally get from grazing. It's bacteria growing around the roots of grass. Because they never grow outside and because they never graze, they never get B12. And so 90% of all of the B12 that we make as people, we feed to farmed animals so that they have B12 because they're otherwise deficient. And so when we say we need to eat animals to get our B12, we don't. We just cut out the middleman and eat the supplements that we're making.
A bit like solar energy, right? Rather than using photosynthesis and then the cow, and then we just get, that's, no?
No, not quite following you.
So if you're looking at greens, vegetables, grass as a solar-powered chemical reaction, right, we're getting the energy straight from the sun rather than it turning into fossil fuels.
It's different energy, though, and it's electricity.
Well, no, I know, but we're not. There's not a middleman, right? So we're not using the stored solar energy of hydrocarbons, and we're not using stored solar energy of animal. We're just
so for tree burning, that would be or any kind of biomass that would work as a analogy. I get
Yeah,
you.
sorry, that was
I
very,
get you
very
now.
stupid of me. I didn't really phrase it properly, but I think I'm broadly right.
So the same is true of calcium, right? We believe, because we've been told by the Milk Marketing Board, that we need milk in our lives for calcium. But it's actually, there are actually 20, sorry, let me phrase it differently. Milk is actually the 20th most abundant food source for calcium available to us. The ones above it are all plants. It's not the most abundant form of calcium available to us at all, is another way to put it. I'm struggling now. We've been talking for too long. And actually, it's not as bioavailable in milk as it is in plants. It's a consistent theme. Animals get their calcium and their protein and the other things we value from them from plants, except for B12, because we give them the B12. They get it from plants. They don't make it. Animals don't synthesize protein or calcium. They eat it in the plants that we feed them. And we're taking vast amounts of land to feed these animals and get a diminishing return. In terms of a cow, we put 10 times more protein in than we get back out. And that's why wildlife is depleted across the world. And in our food grass extract that we're looking at now is an abundance of calcium, minerals, protein, omega oils. It's just incredible. And you think, well, it's like a cow's best kept secret. Grass is an amazingly nutritious food source. You need 4 stomachs to eat it up until now, but we found a way to take it out at twice the efficiency of a cow. Any given amount of grass, we can get twice the protein out that a cow can without the cow, without the methane emissions, the climate driving stuff, without the loss of wildlife.
And this is your next big adventure.
An next big event, one of them.
This is very exciting stuff.
It is.
My final question. Actually, it's 2 questions conjoined, because you're obviously generically a very successful person. You've got different values sort of bolted onto it, though. What would you say to your 18-year-old self? 18-year-old Dale Vince? Bit of advice? Or?
I'd say you won't die by the time you're 20, because that's what I believed.
You thought you'd die by the age of 20?
I did.
Why?
I just thought that my life was quite lived like that. It was a shock to me when I got to 20 and thought, hey, I'm still alive.
Still here. Yeah. And what's your biggest regret?
I don't have any. I don't have a single regret. None. Seriously, none. There's nothing that I've done or experienced that I wouldn't do again, let's say. Well, it's the wrong way to look at it, do again. You know, if you're starting again, you have all kinds of different choices and stuff like that. But I've got no regrets about anything.
I'm sure there's probably some 16-year-olds watching this thinking, this guy's done a lot. He's got life sorted out. I need to go to Reading this summer and take that acid trip. Dale Vince, been fabulous talking to you.
You too.